Hi, Kieran. Here in Israel, it's been relatively quiet. One barrage of Iranian ballistic missiles overnight. They were intercepted. Also intercepted this morning several Iranian drones, though one got past the air defense systems and struck a home in northern Israel. No reports of serious casualties, though. Israel says it's now destroyed around half of all Iran's missile launches, and that's why we're not seeing, that's why the attacks seem to have decreased. Iran claims that it's launching fewer but more sophisticated missiles. No real evidence that we've seen of that. Certainly, Israel's attacks on Iran, they've been continuing at a much more intense pace. The Israeli military today saying that it had killed two senior Revolutionary Guard figures, including a man they allege was responsible for Iran's funding of Hamas. The Israeli army also saying it had struck for a second time the Isfahan nuclear facility. Local officials there saying that there's been no leak of radiation, but it is something that nearby Arab states have been expressing concerns about.
And we saw those talks in Geneva yesterday, didn't we, between an Iranian and European delegation. Not much sign of progress, though, is there, on the diplomatic front?
Yeah, that's right. It seems that Iran is still saying that it's not going to restart negotiations with the Americans over its nuclear program as long as Israel's attacks on Iran continue. They, I think, are very unlikely to stop, though.
Unfortunately, we have heard that the U.S. may join this aggression. That would be very unfortunate, and I think that would be very, very dangerous for everybody. But in order for us to come back to diplomacy, the aggression should be stopped. It is obvious I cannot go to negotiation with the United States when our people are under bombardments, under the support of the United States.
Well, Iran seems to be ruling out completely giving up its uranium enrichment program, which is what President Trump wants it to do. But ominously for Iran, 6 American B-2 bombers are said to have left the U.S. for the Pacific island of Guam. They're the planes that would be carrying those huge bunker buster bombs that would be used in any American strike on Iran's underground nuclear sites if President Trump were to order them. Iran's supreme leader is said to have nominated 3 potential successors in case he is killed in any strike. So this region really is in a state of anxious limbo. Not to forget, finally, of course, the bloodshed continues all the while in Gaza. 200 people, more than 200 people, said to have been killed in the past 2 days.
Thanks, Secunder. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is the Middle East analyst and author Aaron David Miller. President Trump seems to have bet on diplomacy, and diplomacy doesn't seem to be going very well.
No, it's not, and I think it probably won't. Look, there are three possibilities here. Number one, the status quo continues, what we've seen since last Thursday, Friday. Number two, there's a negotiated off-ramp. Number three, the first is considered unsustainable, the second unrealistic. So that brings us to the end of a two-week period, or I might add even before. There's no telling what the Americans could do. I think right now, if the first is unsustainable, the second is unrealistic, I'm afraid, or I guess if you're worried about regional escalation, the third option, which is an American strike, either on discrete Iranian nuclear facilities or more comprehensively, seems to me inevitable.
It's inevitable. Do you think, within 2 weeks, Donald Trump is going to sanction a strike on Iran?
I think, or sooner. And I think what the president's final decision on this, I think, will be made, as most of his foreign policy decisions are made, based on whether he believes risk aversion on one hand, that is no strike, or risk readiness on the other, a strike, whether which option makes him appear the strongest and which option carries more risk with respect to the perception that he's weak. So I think it will probably be a relatively close call, although I don't see any alternative. If the Israelis in the next 10 days don't find a way to inflict significant damage on Fordo, which would take the Americans off the hook, or by some miracle, the Iranians give up and are willing to accept the right to enrich, but no real capacity or ability to enrich uranium, then I think you are facing this decision. And I think a strike under those circumstances is highly likely. I said inevitable, nothing is, many things.
How would the US avert another one of those forever wars that Donald Trump used to be so passionately against if he were to strike Tehran?
Well, it depends how you describe a forever war. I would argue that Iraq and Afghanistan, the two longest wars in American history, where the standard for victory was never could the U.S. win, but when would it leave and what would it leave behind? Those are 20-year propositions. We're not talking about a 20-year proposition.
Are you sure?
It doesn't mean that there won't be escalation. Well, look, in order to have a 20-year war, you need a sustained capacity to essentially oppose or keep the United States militarily preoccupied. And then you need a set of objectives on the part of the United States which go beyond simply trying to inflict a devastating blow on Iran's nuclear facilities. I see no chance of a deployment of the largest projection of military power since the Second Iraq War. No.
You don't think Iran will retaliate, though? You don't think Iran will retaliate and this will escalate and who knows where it all will end?
Well, but it's the who knows where it ever ends proposition that I think is frightening, to be sure. But it's not the kind of forever war that would occur on a day-to-day basis with the Americans deploying hundreds of thousands of forces in Iran, and Iran with the capacity to, well, first of all, the Americans are not going to deploy ground troops.
Do you think the White House, sorry to come in there, do you think the White House has thought through the possibility that the Iranian regime collapses? And then what?
I think they would be fascinated and applaud if that happened. And the reality is the Israelis and a potential American strike will weaken the regime substantially. The problem is there's no ready-made alternative. Humpty Dumpty can be knocked off the wall, but who's going to put the pieces of Humpty Dumpty together again should Humpty Dumpty fall? And that is the problem with regime change. In the Middle East, it's only occurred in recent years under three sets of conditions. Number one, Egypt and Tunisia, where millions assemble in the streets and security forces refuse or are unable to fire on the crowds. Ben Ali and Mubarak are pushed out of power. Syria, where HTS
I'm afraid it's fascinating to hear this. We have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.